What would you do if the world decided your worth before you even spoke a word? Imagine walking back to your seat on a plane, your ticket in hand, your heart full of excitement, and finding a stranger sitting there, refusing to move. And when you speak up, every eye turns towards you, not with understanding, but with quiet judgment. That's what happened to 13-year-old Amara Blake, the daughter of a black billionaire. She wasn't loud. She wasn't rude. She simply asked for what was hers. Yet in that moment, she faced a truth far too many people know sometimes. Money can buy the seat, but not the respect. But instead of breaking, Amara did something no one expected. She stayed calm. She stood firm. And that choice, small, quiet, and brave, would shake an entire airline and awaken a conversation the world couldn't ignore. If you were her, would you have spoken up or walked away? This isn't just a story about a seat on a plane. It's a story about courage, dignity, and what it truly means to belong. Stay with us, and if this story touches something inside you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us what humanity still means. The morning sun spilled like honey across the glass walls of Los Angeles International Airport. Travelers rushed past one another, some half awake, some half dreaming. But among the noise, one girl stood out not because of what she wore, but because of how calm she was. Amara Blake, 14 years old, sat quietly near gate C7 with a paperback open on her lap. Her braids were pulled into a neat ponytail, and a small silver cross shimmered at her neck. She read slowly, her lips moving as if she were whispering each word to herself, tasting the story like music. Her father, Dr. Nathaniel Blake, stood a few feet away, finishing a call on his sleek black phone. Even in a crowd, people recognized him, the founder and CEO of Aerolink Systems, one of the most powerful tech companies in aviation. But to Amara, he wasn't a billionaire. He was just Dad, the man who still made her cocoa every Sunday morning before church, and who always said, "Power means nothing if it doesn't protect someone smaller than you." Today, he was sending her to Chicago for a youth leadership conference, her first trip alone. Her voice quivered with both excitement and nerves when she hugged him. "Are you sure I'll be okay by myself?" she asked softly. Nathaniel smiled. "You're my daughter. You'll be more than okay. You'll inspire someone before you land." He handed her the boarding pass. Seat 2A, first class. He booked it not for luxury, but for her comfort. She had mild anxiety and sometimes struggled with crowds. He kissed her forehead. "Remember, kindness doesn't mean silence. If someone crosses your line, speak with grace, but stand firm." Amara nodded. Her fingers tightened on the small notebook she always carried. Dreams and lessons. In it, she wrote things she learned from the world, small moments of truth. When boarding began, she followed the line quietly. The flight attendant smiled, scanned her pass, and guided her toward first class. The cabin smelled of soft leather and coffee. She found seat 2A, right by the window, sunlight brushing across it like a blessing. Amara placed her bag neatly under the seat, sat down, and pulled out her book again. Outside the window, ground crew waved orange batons. Somewhere, a child cried in the distance. The world felt big and beautiful. Oh, for a few minutes, everything was perfect, until a shadow fell across her page. A woman in a white wool coat stopped in the aisle. She was elegant. Sharp, every detail of her outfit screamed wealth and confidence. Her diamond bracelet caught the light like frost. The name tag on her designer handbag read, Victoria Hale. She frowned slightly. "I believe you're sitting in my seat," she said, her tone dripping with practiced politeness. Amara blinked, surprised. She looked down at her ticket. I think this is seat 2A. That's what my boarding pass says." Victoria gave a quick, dismissive laugh. "Oh, sweetheart, I think you're mistaken. This seat is for priority guest frequent flyers, not promotional passengers." The girl froze. Promotional. She didn't even know what that meant. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. A man across the aisle looked up but quickly turned away. The cabin grew strangely quiet. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Amara managed, "but this is the number on my ticket." She offered the boarding pass with her small, steady hand. Victoria didn't even glance at it. Instead, she looked toward the flight attendant. "Excuse me, can you please handle this? This child seems to be confused." The attendant, Eli Torres, walked over, uncertain. He scanned the boarding pass, then looked back at the woman. "Ma'am, it says 2A. That's indeed her seat." Victoria tilted her head, the smile tightening. "Oh, I'm sure there's been a mix-up. These things happen. Maybe she was upgraded by accident." Her voice was calm, but edged the kind of tone used to remind everyone in the room who really had power. Amara felt her stomach twist. Every eye in first class seemed to weigh her, silently asking, "Does she belong here?" Eli tried to diffuse it. "Let's double-check with the gate, ma'am. But for now, please take your assigned seat." Victoria sighed dramatically. "Fine. But make sure this is corrected before we take off. Some of us pay for status." As she walked away, heels clicking sharply against the floor, Amara felt a lump forming in her throat. She didn't cry. She opened her book again, pretending to read, but her eyes stayed fixed on the same line. When Eli returned, he knelt beside her. "I'm sorry about that, miss," he said gently. "You're fine here. She's just particular." Amara forced a small smile. "It's okay. My dad says, sometimes people see what they fear losing." Eli paused, startled by her words, such wisdom from someone so young. He smiled back. "That's pretty smart, actually." The plane doors closed. The captain's voice filled the cabin. Captain Olivia Grant, confident and steady. "Good morning, passengers. Welcome aboard Pacific Sky Flight 309 to Chicago. Estimated flight time 3 hours and 55 minutes. Please relax and enjoy your flight." Amara leaned against the window as the engines began to roar. The city below blurred into lines of light. She whispered to herself, "You're safe. You belong." But somewhere deep inside, a quiet unease began to grow, as if the morning had just whispered a warning. Because she didn't know yet that by the time they reached cruising altitude, the world would know her name, and the seat 2A would no longer be just a number, it would become a symbol. The sky outside the cabin had turned a soft, endless blue. The plane was climbing, steady and calm, but the tension inside first class hadn't settled. Amara could feel it, that invisible chill that sometimes comes when people decide who deserves comfort and who doesn't. Victoria Hale sat just 2 rows behind her now. She hadn't looked Amara's way again, but her presence pressed against the girl's shoulders like a weight. Every so often, Amara could hear the faint clinking of Victoria's bracelet and the sharp whisper of her voice as she chatted with another passenger, something about charity luncheons, private schools, and how the new generation doesn't know its place anymore. Amara kept her eyes on her book. She tried to lose herself in words, but each sentence blurred. Her chest tightened the way it always did when she felt small, invisible, or misunderstood. She closed the book slowly, set it on her lap, and breathed the way her father had taught her in for 4. Out for 4. The cabin lights softened. A steward passed by offering juice. She smiled politely, asked for orange, and thanked him. Eli Torres, the attendant from earlier, walked past again. This time, he gave her a reassuring nod, the kind that said, "I see you." It helped a little. But fate, that morning, wasn't done testing her. Half an hour into the flight, Amara felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned. It was Victoria again. The woman leaned forward, her perfume sweet but suffocating. "Dear," she said, "the flight attendant told me the gate confirmed a mistake. C2A was meant for me. They said you were upgraded by accident." Amara frowned. "That's strange," she said quietly. "No one told me." Victoria smiled thinly. "Well, I'm telling you now. You can take 4B, it's still in first class. You'll hardly notice the difference." There was a stillness that followed, heavy and uncomfortable. Passengers pretended not to listen, though every ear strained toward them. "I'm sorry," Amara said, keeping her tone gentle but steady. "I can't move. This is my seat." Victoria's smile cracked. "You can't move." She repeated it as if the words were absurd. "Young lady, I don't think you understand how these things work. Some of us have earned certain privileges." Amara's heart beat faster, but she kept her hands folded. "My father bought this seat. Fairly. That did it." Victoria's eyes sharpened. "Oh," she said slowly, "your father. And who might he be? A YouTube star, a sponsor child." The cruelty landed like a slap, soft but deliberate. Eli, standing at the end of the aisle, froze. Amara took a breath. She remembered what her father had said: grace is power under control. Her voice didn't shake when she replied, "His name is Nathaniel Blake." For a second, Victoria's face went still, almost blank. The name clearly meant something. It floated around headlines, tech journals, donation plaques. But then she recovered and laughed under her breath. Nathaniel Blake. Well, isn't that cute? Pretending to be someone important. Eli stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said, this time with authority, "please return to your seat." Victoria turned to him, eyes flashing. "Don't ma'am me. I've flown with Pacific Sky for 15 years. You'll regret this tone." "Please sit down," he repeated. "You're disturbing another passenger." "I'm correcting a mistake," she snapped. The exchange drew attention. A man in business attire looked up, frowned. A mother traveling with her son whispered, "That's the girl from the news last month, the Literacy Project kid." Eli met Amara's eyes for a moment, silently asking if she wanted him to escalate the matter. She shook her head. "It's fine," she murmured. "Let her sit wherever she feels comfortable." But Victoria didn't move. "That's not the point." She insisted. "You people always play the victim. It's exhausting." A chill rippled through the cabin. The words hung there, ugly and raw. Eli's jaw tightened. "Ma'am," he said, "now firm. That language is unacceptable. Sit down immediately or I'll call the captain." Victoria's lips parted, but before she could respond, another voice echoed through the cabin, calm, authoritative, female. "This is Captain Grant," it said from the speaker. "Is there an issue in first class?" Eli pressed the intercom. "Just a passenger misunderstanding, Captain." A pause. Then the captain replied, "Resolve it, please, respectfully." Victoria huffed and finally stormed back to her seat, muttering under her breath. When she was gone, Amara sat completely still. The hum of the engine seemed louder now. Her throat ached from holding back words she couldn't quite say. Eli crouched next to her again. "You handled that better than most adults I've seen," he said softly. She smiled faintly. "Dad says calm is a weapon, too." He nodded, but guilt shadowed his eyes. No one should have to use it at 14. For a while, the cabin returned to normal. Coffee was served. The seatbelt sign turned off. Amara pulled out her notebook again. She wrote in slow, deliberate strokes. "People will try to move you from where you belong. But belonging isn't about permission. It's about purpose." She stared at the sentence for a long time, then underlined it twice. In row 4, Victoria opened her tablet. Her reflection stared back at her, polished, perfect, untouchable. But for the first time, she felt something prick behind her eyes. Guilt. No, she decided, annoyance. Annoyance at being challenged by a child. She typed an email to customer relations mid-flight, complaining about improper seating protocols. She added a line that said, "I don't feel safe sharing a row with certain passengers." Eli saw her typing when he passed by again. His stomach turned. He didn't intervene. Not yet, but he noted the time, the row, the words. Hours later, as the plane began to cruise over Colorado, Amara drifted into half-sleep. Outside, the clouds looked like cotton spread across a blue tablecloth. The engines hummed like a lullaby. In her dream, she heard her father's voice again. "There will come a day when silence feels easier. Don't choose it." When she opened her eyes, something had changed. Eli stood at the front of the cabin, speaking quietly into his radio. A few passengers whispered, turning toward the back. Captain Grant's door opened. She stepped out tall, composed, her uniform crisp as steel. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes carried the kind of calm that meant she already knew everything. She walked down the aisle slowly, each step measured. When she reached Amara, she paused. "Miss Blake," she said gently, "I need to confirm something with you. Are you comfortable here?" Amara nodded. Confused. "Yes." "Captain." Grant nodded. "Good." Then she turned her gaze toward the back. "Mrs. Hale, I need a word with you." The entire cabin went silent. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Victoria straightened in her seat. "Is there a problem?" The captain's tone remained polite. "Yes. It seems a passenger filed a complaint about you, but before we act on it, I'd like to verify what happened." "What complaint?" Victoria's voice rose an octave. Grant looked to Eli. "Mr. Torres." He hesitated for just a moment, then said it clearly. "Verbal harassment and racially charged language." "Ma'am." The color drained from Victoria's face. "That's ridiculous. That girl." She pointed at Amara. "She's exaggerating." "I was defending my seat." Grant's expression didn't change. "You raised your voice, disrupted the cabin, and made discriminatory remarks. We have multiple witnesses." A man in row 3 lifted his hand reluctantly. "I heard it too." He said, "You said you people." Victoria looked around, betrayed. "This is absurd. Do you all know who I am?" Grant folded her hands behind her back. "Right now, you're a passenger under my responsibility, and my responsibility is to protect everyone's dignity equally." Her voice was calm, but the words were final. Victoria's breath came sharp and fast. "I want to call my lawyer." "You can do that after we land," Grant replied. "Until then, please remain seated. You'll be escorted off the aircraft upon arrival." Gas rippled through the cabin. Amara's hands shook. She hadn't wanted punishment, only peace. But the moment hung there, suspended, heavy and unreal, a reckoning written in the quiet air. Captain Grant gave one last glance toward Amara. "You did nothing wrong. Miss Blake," she said softly, "rest easy." Then she walked back to the cockpit, outside. The clouds drifted on, endless and bright, and somewhere between them, a young girl's courage began to echo louder than injustice itself. For a long while, no one spoke. The hum of the engines was the only sound left between them. Amara sat frozen, her mind replaying every word, every stare that had cut through the air like a knife. She didn't know whether to feel relieved or guilty that Captain Grant had intervened. Justice had appeared, but justice never came without ripples. When the captain returned to the cockpit, whispers began to fill the cabin like wind through dry leaves. Some passengers murmured their approval. Others kept silent, avoiding eye contact as if silence would keep them safe from discomfort. Eli moved quietly down the aisle, collecting empty glasses. His hands were steady, but his heart wasn't. He had seen discrimination before in subtle looks, coded jokes, and tone shifts, but something about watching it unfold against a child made it heavier. He stole a glance at Amara. She was staring out the window, eyes distant, reflecting clouds and sunlight. Victoria Hale sat stiffly in her seat, arms crossed, eyes burning into the horizon. The calm mask she wore cracked in the corners. Her fingers trembled slightly as she gripped the armrest. She wasn't used to being challenged, and certainly not by a girl who didn't even look old enough to drive. The humiliation simmered under her skin, and her mind searched desperately for a way to reclaim control. When Eli offered her a drink, she refused sharply. "Don't pretend to be kind now," she hissed. He said nothing, just nodded, collected the tray, and moved on. Amara caught the brief exchange. Her chest tightened again. It wasn't victory, she felt it was something far more complicated. The adults around her looked smaller now, fragile in their pride. She thought of her father's words that morning. Power means nothing if it doesn't protect someone smaller than you, but who protected people from themselves. An hour passed. The clouds outside grew darker as the plane crossed over the Midwest. Thunder rolled somewhere far away. Amara's phone buzzed softly with a notification. She checked it. Her father had texted, "Everything okay, little one." She hesitated, then typed back, "Fine, just strange people." The 3 dots of his reply blinked for a long time, then disappeared. He was probably in a meeting, she thought. He'd ask later. As she put her phone away, a faint sound reached her ears, the click of a camera shutter. She turned her head slightly and caught a glimpse of the passenger in row 3 holding up a phone, filming discreetly. Eli noticed it too, his brow tightening. "Sir," Eli said softly, "please refrain from recording other passengers." The man shrugged. "It's for accountability. You never know what goes viral these days." And he was right. Within an hour, a 15-second clip would appear online, posted by that very passenger. It would show a polished woman arguing with a teenage girl and a captain stepping in. The caption would read, "Entitled passenger tries to take seat from black teenager, gets instant karma." But Amara didn't know that yet. All she knew was the sudden heaviness in her stomach, a sense that her quiet world was about to become very loud. Victoria leaned forward, whispering to the man beside her. "They're all recording me now. This is harassment. I should sue this airline." Her voice quivered between anger and panic. "Ma'am," Eli said gently, "please relax." Everything is under control. Under control, she snapped. You've ruined my reputation. I'm a member of the Hale Foundation. My husband is on the Pacific Sky Board. The cabin grew still again. Eli didn't flinch. That doesn't change how people should be treated, he said softly. Victoria's jaw dropped. No one spoke to her that way. For the first time in years, she felt the sting of powerlessness, and it terrified her. The intercom beeped softly. Captain Grant's voice returned. Ladies and gentlemen, we're expecting mild turbulence ahead. Please fasten your seatbelts. The plane dipped slightly. The lights flickered. Amara gripped the armrests, her pulse racing. But she forced herself to breathe slowly. A small tremor of fear mixed with the adrenaline of everything that had happened. Victoria muttered something under her breath, something about bad omens. Then, out of nowhere, she stood up. I need to use the restroom, she said, ignoring the seatbelt sign. Eli hurried down the aisle. Ma'am, please sit down. It's unsafe. I will not be told what to do by flight attendants who think they're heroes. She spat, stepping past him. The plane jolted suddenly. A coffee cup slid off a tray, spilling onto the carpet. Passengers gasped as Victoria stumbled, clutching the back of Amara's seat for balance. Her hand gripped Amara's shoulder, nails digging in by accident. How, Amara cried softly. Victoria froze, realizing what she'd done. Her eyes widened, but pride trapped her tongue. Instead of apologizing, she straightened her coat and hissed, Watch where you're sitting. Eli reached for her arm. Ma'am, that's enough. Return to your seat immediately. Captain Grant's door opened again, firm footsteps echoing. Mrs. Hale, she said, her tone cold and final. Take your seat. Now. Something broke in Victoria's voice when she answered. This is madness. I'm being persecuted. But Captain Grant didn't raise her voice. You've endangered passengers during turbulence and assaulted a minor. You will remain seated for the rest of this flight. If you refuse, I will have federal security waiting in Chicago. Every passenger stared, holding their breath. Victoria sank slowly into her seat, trembling. Her lipstick, once perfect, had smudged. She looked smaller now, not the powerful socialite she'd imagined herself to be, but just another person stripped of entitlement. Amara turned back to the window. Raindrops were starting to form against the glass. Somewhere below, the land stretched vast and golden. The world kept moving, indifferent to the small dramas playing out above it. When the turbulence passed, the cabin grew quiet again. Eli crouched beside Amara's seat. You okay? He whispered. She nodded. I'm fine. Just tired. He hesitated, then said, I've never seen anyone handle cruelty like that before. You didn't flinch. She smiled faintly. Dad says storms don't scare trees that know their roots. Eli blinked, half smiling. Your dad sounds wise. He says wisdom just comes from scars. As the plane steadied, Amara opened her notebook once more. Her handwriting was smaller now, the letters curling like fragile thoughts. Sometimes power looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like standing up without raising your voice. When she closed the notebook, she felt lighter, not safe, not yet, but grounded. Behind her, Victoria stared blankly at the seat in front of her. Her phone buzzed nonstop with messages, news alerts, work updates, and now, a notification she didn't expect someone had tagged her name online. She tapped it, and there it was, the video, the 15 seconds of her life that would soon become a national headline. Her stomach dropped. She watched the clip again and again, the comments flooding below. Privilege caught on camera. That poor girl handled it better than most adults. This woman should be banned from flying. Her fingers trembled as she locked the screen. For the first time, she realized how quickly power could evaporate when truth was visible. Up front, Amara sat still, unaware of the storm that had already begun below them. She watched a streak of lightning flash across the sky and thought of her father again. His voice, calm as ever, whispered in her memory, "When people try to take something that's yours, don't just protect it. Show them why it was never theirs to begin with." Outside, the thunder rumbled like a warning and a promise at once. Inside, a quiet girl in seat 2A had already changed more than she knew. By the time the plane began its descent toward Chicago, the story inside the cabin had already escaped into the world. No one on Flight 309 knew it yet, but somewhere below, strangers were watching the 15-second clip that would define every passenger on board. Amara didn't know about the video. She sat quietly, her hands clasped over her notebook. The sky outside had shifted to a faint gold, sunlight breaking through the clouds like forgiveness after a storm. Yet she could feel it the way people were looking at her now, some with warmth, others with guilt, and a few with quiet admiration that felt too heavy for someone her age. When Eli brought her a cup of warm tea, she smiled gently. "Thank you," she said, voice soft. He hesitated before replying, "You know, most people in your situation would be shouting or crying right now." Amara stirred her tea slowly. Maybe, but then the story would just become noise, and no one listens to noise. Eli nodded, struck again by her calm. "Where did you learn to think like that?" She smiled faintly, from watching people who confused loudness with strength. Behind them, Victoria Hale sat motionless, the lines on her face deepening with every second. The phone in her hand was a mirror she couldn't look away from. The clip had reached 500,000 views by now. She scrolled through hundreds of comments, each one more brutal than the last. The internet had judged her, swiftly and without mercy. Her mind raced with excuses. Maybe it was edited. Maybe someone would defend her. But deep down, she knew what the camera had captured wasn't distortion. It was truth, stripped of her control. When Captain Grant's voice came through the speakers again, steady and measured, it snapped her back to the present. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our descent. Please fasten your seatbelts." Victoria swallowed hard. Her throat felt dry. She turned her face toward the window, pretending to admire the skyline that glowed like liquid fire beneath the wings. But she could feel the eyes on her. Every cough, every whisper, every rustle of a newspaper sounded like judgment. Amara sensed it too. Part of her wanted to look back, to offer some sign of forgiveness. But another part whispered caution. Oh, forgiveness wasn't a performance. It was a decision, and she wasn't ready yet. Eli walked down the aisle again, checking belts, his smile practiced but tired. He paused near row 4, where Victoria sat. "Ma'am, we'll be landing shortly. Please make sure your tray table is secure." Victoria looked up at him, her expression breaking for just a second. "Will there really be people waiting for me?" Eli's voice softened. "Yes, ma'am. The captain has arranged for a discussion with airport security and the airline's ethics liaison." The word ethics made her stomach turn. "I didn't mean for things to get this far," she whispered, almost to herself. "I just wanted respect." Eli nodded once. Respect doesn't come from taking it. It comes from giving it. He moved on. Victoria stared after him, his words echoing in her mind. The plane touched down smoothly. The passengers applauded softly, a habit of relief more than gratitude. Amara's palms were damp, but her heart was steady. When she looked outside, she could see her father's city tall glass towers and long gray streets stretching toward Lake Michigan. Somewhere in that maze of steel was the man who taught her to stand still when storms came. The door opened with a hiss of air, and the smell of the terminal replaced the recycled oxygen of the cabin. Passengers began to stand, collecting bags, adjusting jackets, pretending everything had been normal, but it hadn't been. Everyone knew that. 2 uniformed officers waited just outside the jet bridge. Between them stood a woman in a Navy suit with an ID badge that read Ava Sinclair, Pacific Sky Ethics Division. Her presence was calm but purposeful, like a teacher entering a room that had gone too quiet. Eli met her at the door. They exchanged a brief look she already knew. The story had moved faster than the flight itself. When Victoria stepped forward, Ava smiled politely. Mrs. Hale, we'll need a few minutes of your time. Victoria froze. Am I under arrest? Not at this time, Ava said, but we need to document what occurred. It's standard protocol when a report of verbal or physical misconduct is filed. Passengers passed by slowly, pretending not to stare, but failing miserably. Some shook their heads. Others muttered words like disgrace or about time. Amara stepped off the plane last. She kept her gaze low, clutching her notebook against her chest. She didn't look at Victoria. She couldn't. She wanted to leave this whole thing behind to just find her father and let him hug away everything she'd had to hold in. But as she reached the terminal, a wave of flashes hit her. Cameras, reporters, phones. Someone shouted, Amara Blake. Is it true? She's the daughter of Nathaniel Blake. The name spread through the crowd like sparks on dry grass. Blake, Aerolink, Billionaire. Her stomach dropped. A tall man in a gray coat pushed through the reporters, eyes sharp and protective. Step back, he ordered, his voice commanding without effort. It was her father. Dr. Nathaniel Blake moved with the kind of calm that came from years of holding power but never abusing it. He wrapped his arm around his daughter's shoulders. She's not answering questions, he said firmly. She's a child, not your headline. The cameras didn't stop. Though, flashes continued as he guided her through the crowd. Dad, she whispered, people are filming me. I know, he murmured. Let them. Truth looks good on you. They reached the car waiting at the curb. Inside, the noise faded. Amara sat in the leather seat, finally letting her body slump. She didn't cry, but she let out a breath that had been trapped since the plane took off. Nathaniel glanced at her. You did the right thing, he said. She shook her head. I didn't do anything. He smiled sadly. Sometimes doing nothing is exactly the right thing. Silence can reveal people better than shouting ever could. Amara stared out the window as the airport disappeared behind them. In the distance, she could still see the reflection of the terminal's glass, tiny, fleeting, but bright. Back inside, Ava Sinclair was interviewing witnesses. She had seen stories like this before, but something about this one was different. It wasn't just a scandal. It was a mirror. When she spoke to Eli, he handed over a small note Amara had left on the seat before leaving. In neat handwriting, it read, If someone treats you like you don't belong, it's because they've forgotten that dignity isn't assigned. It's shared. Ava folded the paper gently, slipping it into her pocket. She didn't know it yet, but that line would appear in headlines the next morning, quoted across social media, printed on posters, and recited in interviews. Victoria Hale, escorted quietly through a side door, walked past another monitor displaying her face, paused mid-argument, her finger raised, her expression frozen in arrogance. She wanted to look away but couldn't. It was like staring at a stranger who had borrowed her body. When she reached the security office, she finally whispered, "I didn't mean to hurt her." Ava looked at her calmly. "Then prove it. What happens next depends on what you do with the weight of that sentence. Outside, in the back seat of the car." Amara rested her head against her father's shoulder. "Is she going to be okay?" she asked quietly. Nathaniel hesitated before answering. "I hope so, because that's the only way this story ends right." As they drove into the Golden City skyline, Amara opened her notebook once more. She wrote with slow, steady strokes as the world outside blurred into motion. The world doesn't change when someone loses their seat. It changes when someone learns why they lost it. Morning came with a chill that wrapped around the city of Chicago, like a reminder that even sunlight could feel cold. The news had spread overnight. Every screen in every cafe, every phone in every hand, was showing the same clip: a young black girl in seat 2A being confronted by a white woman in pearls and entitlement. By sunrise, the names had surfaced: Amara Blake, Nathaniel Blake, Aerolink Systems. The internet connected dots faster than any journalist ever could. Nathaniel's phone hadn't stopped buzzing. His assistant had tried to filter the chaos: reporters, board members, even government contacts, but there was no controlling a storm that had already chosen its direction. Still, in the middle of the noise, he sat quietly in his study, the early lights spilling across the shelves of awards and framed patents. He held his coffee in one hand, his daughter's notebook in the other. She'd left it open on the counter after breakfast. The page read, "Sometimes power is what you don't say." He smiled faintly. "You get that from your mother?" he whispered. "In the next room." Amara sat cross-legged on the couch, watching the morning news. Her face was on the screen, paused mid-blink while commentators debated racial tension in first class. She turned down the volume, her throat tightening. "Dad," she said quietly, "I didn't want this." Nathaniel walked in, set down his cup, and sat beside her. "I know. They're saying I planned it, that we used it for publicity." He looked at her, then really looked the way only a father could. People always need a villain before they can understand a victim, but the truth doesn't belong to them. It belongs to you. She exhaled slowly, leaning against his shoulder. "I wish the world would stop watching." He smiled sadly. "The world watches what it needs to learn." The phone rang again. He answered, voice calm, professional. "Blake speaking." It was the airline CEO, Richard Calder, his tone rehearsed with corporate regret. "Dr. Blake, first, let me express my deepest apologies for what your daughter endured. We're launching a full investigation," Nathaniel cut in, his tone even but edged with quiet steel. "I'm not interested in statements. Richard, I'm interested in change." Calder hesitated. "Of course. We're prepared to don't offer money." Nathaniel interrupted, "Offer accountability." A silence followed, thick and uncomfortable. Then Calder cleared his throat. "Would you be open to consulting with us? We could use your insight on bias reform and passenger conduct policies." Nathaniel didn't answer right away. He glanced at his daughter, who was still staring at the muted TV screen. "I'll think about it," he said finally. After he hung up, Amara looked up at him. "You're not mad I am," he admitted, But anger is like lightning, bright, loud, and gone too fast. What matters is what we build after the storm. Later that day, he took her with him to the AeroLink headquarters downtown. It was a towering building of glass and quiet purpose, reflecting the gray sky. Inside, people greeted them with nods of respect and sympathy, though Amara could see something else in their eyes. Pride, maybe, or guilt for not realizing how close injustice always sat. In his office, Nathaniel met with his communications team. Screens displayed headlines, trending tags, opinion pieces, public sentiments 85% supportive. One analyst said, "The hashtag Seat2A has hit 7 million views. People are framing it as a symbol of modern-day dignity." Nathaniel leaned back, his voice soft but firm. "Symbols are fine. Systems are better. I want every airline to rethink their training, their protocols, their definitions of priority." His assistant looked uncertain. "You want to make this an initiative?" He nodded. "A movement. Not about revenge, about reform." Amara watched him, both proud and puzzled. "You really think people can change?" she asked when the room emptied. He smiled. "People don't change when they're shamed. They change when they're shown the mirror and choose to keep looking." Meanwhile, across the city, Victoria Hale sat in a small, windowless room at the Pacific Sky headquarters. The glamour she once carried like armor was gone. Her hair was unpinned, her eyes shadowed. She had spent the night replaying that 15-second clip, every frame stabbing at her pride. Ava Sinclair, the ethics officer, sat opposite her with a folder in hand. "Mrs. Hale," she began, "the airline has reviewed footage and passenger statements. We're not pursuing criminal charges, but we are suspending your status and placing you under review for conduct violation." Victoria barely nodded. "I understand. But," Ava continued, "Dr." Blake declined to press further. "His only request is that we invest in cultural empathy programs and public accountability." That caught her off guard. He's not suing, no. He believes in education over punishment. Victoria looked down, silent for a long moment. "I don't know if that makes me feel relieved or ashamed." Ava studied her quietly. "Both, maybe. That's how people start to grow." Outside the building, protesters had gathered not angry, but resolute. They held signs that read, "Respect has no seat number and dignity flies with everyone." The story had evolved. It wasn't just about a single flight anymore. It was about something much larger. By late afternoon, Amara and her father stepped out of the AeroLink lobby into the cool wind. Cameras waited again, but this time Nathaniel didn't turn away. He stood still, calm, and spoke once, his voice carrying across the crowd. "My daughter didn't fight back because she shouldn't have had to. This isn't about a seat, it's about space. The space every human deserves to occupy without being questioned for existing." He placed a hand gently on Amara's shoulder. "She reminded us that silence can be strong, but silence should never be necessary." The crowd erupted in applause, flashes lighting their faces. Amara looked up at her father, eyes shimmering with pride and disbelief. "You really said that?" He smiled. "You said it first. I just borrowed your courage." That night, as city lights flickered outside her window, Amara scrolled through her phone. Her notifications overflowed with messages from strangers, some offering kindness, others sharing their own stories of humiliation, exclusion, and endurance. She read every single one, her heart heavy yet full. One message stood out. It was anonymous. No profile picture. Just words: "I was on that flight. I didn't speak up. I wish I had. I'm sorry. She didn't know who had sent it, a passenger, maybe even a crew member, but she replied anyway. You can still speak now. Tell the truth. That's how change starts. When she put her phone away, the silence of her room felt softer than before. She glanced at her notebook on the desk and opened it to a blank page. For a long time, she stared at it before finally writing, "Maybe forgiveness isn't letting go. Maybe it's choosing what to carry forward." She closed the notebook, placed it beside her bed, and whispered a quiet prayer, not for revenge, but for understanding. Across the city, Victoria Hale sat in her apartment, scrolling through the same headlines. She paused when she saw Nathaniel's statement, read it twice, then 3 times. There was something unfamiliar stirring inside her, something almost painful. Empathy. She put down her phone, looked out her window at the skyline, and whispered to no one. Maybe it's time to listen. And for the first time, she meant it. The following week unfolded like a story. The world refused to stop reading. The clip of Amara sitting silently in Seat 2A had become a symbol, spreading across continents. Schools discussed it, news anchors dissected it, and strangers quoted her father's speech as if it were scripture. Yet for the Blakes, life had not returned to normal. Fame had its own quiet cruelty. It followed them even when the cameras left. One morning, Amara sat at the kitchen table, her untouched cereal turning soggy. She stared at her phone, scrolling through hundreds of unread messages. Some were kind, others sharp and cynical. The kind ones made her cry. The cruel ones made her wonder if kindness was ever enough. Her father entered, holding a stack of letters delivered that morning. In a digital world, few people still wrote with pen and paper. But this story had stirred something old in people, the urge to write, to reach out, to say, "I see you." Nathaniel smiled softly as he dropped a few envelopes in front of her. "People still believe in ink," he said. Amara traced her finger over one envelope. It was pale blue, with shaky handwriting. She opened it carefully. Inside, a single sheet folded in half. "Dear Amara, my name is Victoria. I'm writing because I don't know any other way to say this. I was the woman who stood in front of you on that flight. I thought I deserved that seat. I thought status gave me more right to comfort than you. I was wrong. I've watched the video more times than I can count. At first, I was angry not at myself, but at the world for seeing me as the villain. Then I started to listen to your silence. I realized it said everything I couldn't hear in that moment. I can't erase what I did, but I can change who I am after it. Thank you for teaching me something I should have known years ago. Victoria Hale." Amara read the words twice. The paper trembled in her hands. "Dad," she whispered, "she wrote to me." Nathaniel looked up from his coffee, his face unreadable. "Do you want to answer her? I don't know." She stared at the last line again. "People don't really change, do they?" He smiled gently. "Some don't, but some do, because someone finally made them see." For the first time in days, Amara smiled. Maybe silence can teach. Later that afternoon, Nathaniel's office buzzed with quiet energy. The Reform Initiative, now known as the Open Sky Project, was taking shape. Journalists, educators, and airline executives had gathered to discuss new frameworks for training and accountability. The media called it a revolution with wings. Nathaniel stood before a whiteboard filled with ideas, empathy simulations, youth-led discussions, partnerships with civil rights foundations. But one note, written in Amara's handwriting, stood out: teach hearts before policies. He tapped the note gently and said to his team, "This is our mission statement." Meanwhile, far across town, Victoria sat in a community center classroom, surrounded by faces she once might have ignored. The room buzzed with laughter and conversation. She was there not as a guest, but as a volunteer, helping teach English to immigrant women. She didn't tell anyone who she was. She didn't want pity or recognition. She wanted to learn humility by doing something that didn't need applause. During a break, she stepped outside for air. Her phone buzzed a new email notification. The sender's name froze her breath. From Amara Blake. Subject: your letter. She hesitated before opening it. Dear Mrs. Hale, thank you for writing. I don't hate you. I just didn't understand why kindness always has to prove itself. But if you're learning, then I'm glad. Because I am too. Maybe we both needed that flight for different reasons. I forgive you. But please use your voice now. Not to defend, but to protect someone else when it's their turn in seat 2A. Amara Victoria covered her mouth, tears spilling silently. She had never felt both smaller and freer in the same moment. She pressed the phone to her heart and whispered, I will. A week later, she stood on a small stage at a local event titled Voices for Equity in Travel. She wasn't the keynote speaker, just one of many people sharing stories. When it was her turn, she walked to the microphone and looked out at the crowd. I was the woman in that video, she said, her voice trembling but steadying as she continued. The one who tried to take a young girl's seat? I thought I was entitled, but that girl that silenced showed me who I really was. And I want to spend the rest of my life unlearning that version of myself. The room fell completely silent. Then someone began to clap, then another. Soon, the applause swelled like a tide, washing away the quiet shame that had followed her for weeks. That same night, Amara and Nathaniel watched the clip together from their living room. He leaned forward slightly, the faintest smile curving his lips. She did it, he murmured. Amara nodded. She used her voice. And you, he said softly, used yours without saying a word. The following months became a blur of progress. The Open Sky Project expanded beyond airlines. Universities invited Amara to speak, though she always insisted on being called a student, not an activist. She talked about humanity, not heroism. Her calm presence disarmed audiences. Her humility inspired them. One evening, after a panel discussion in Washington, a young reporter approached her backstage. You've inspired thousands, he said. How does it feel to have changed the world? Amara smiled, tucking her notebook into her backpack. The world was already changing. I just happened to be sitting in the right seat to see it. When she returned to her hotel room, a small envelope waited on the table, the stationery embossed with the airline's new logo. Inside was a simple note from Richard Calder. Amara, we've renamed our mentorship program in your honor. It's called the 2A Fellowship, dedicated to empowering youth to lead with empathy and courage. Thank you for reminding us that dignity flies with everyone. Richard Amara stared at the words for a long time before smiling. She took out her notebook and wrote her final reflection on the incident that had once terrified her. Sometimes the world doesn't change because of anger or power. It changes because someone decided to sit down and stay still until the truth had no choice but to stand up. She closed the notebook, feeling lighter. Outside, the city lights blinked like scattered stars, and somewhere out there, planes crossed the night sky, silent, steady, moving forward At that same moment, in another part of the city, Victoria sat by her window, watching one of those planes disappear into the clouds. She smiled through her tears and whispered softly, "Safe travels. Amara, you've given me my wings back." Spring had begun to soften Chicago's cold edges, and with it came a quiet kind of healing. The storm of media coverage had slowed, leaving behind something steadier respect. The world had stopped shouting and started listening. Yet for Amara, life was only beginning to unfold in new, unexpected ways. It was early morning when she stood on the balcony of her father's penthouse, the skyline glowing gold beneath a thin veil of mist. She watched the planes rise and vanish into the clouds, small dots of silver moving toward unseen destinations. Sometimes she wondered if passengers on those flights were talking about her, the girl from seat 2A. The thought made her both proud and uneasy. Inside, Nathaniel was finishing a call with a senator who wanted him to help draft a federal guideline for equitable air travel policies. His tone was calm, composed as always, but Amara could hear the fatigue hiding in his voice. He had been in nonstop meetings for weeks. Every company wanted his signature, every network his presence. When he finally ended the call, he leaned on the balcony railing beside her. "You know, I used to hate flying," he said quietly. She turned to him, surprised. "You, the man who built half the systems that keep planes in the air?" He chuckled. "That's exactly why. I knew too much about what could go wrong. But after all this," he paused, watching another plane disappear into the morning haze. "Now I see flight differently. It's not about power, it's about trust. Trust that people will do right by each other once they're up there." Amara smiled, then hesitated. "Do you think people are really changing, Dad? Or are they just pretending until something else trends?" Nathaniel looked at her, eyes reflecting years of quiet battles. "Real change doesn't trend, sweetheart. It lingers. It grows roots in silence." That afternoon, Amara and Nathaniel traveled to Washington for a ceremony celebrating the 2A Fellowship. The hall was filled with journalists, activists, and young leaders from across the country. On stage, a new banner hung with bold silver letters, "Dignity flies with everyone." Before the event began, Amara stood backstage, her palms slightly damp. She had been asked to give a speech. She'd written dozens of drafts and thrown most away. What could she say that hadn't already been said 1,000 times? What words could explain how something so humiliating had turned into hope? When her name was called, she walked out into the soft hum of applause. The stage lights were warm on her face, almost blinding. She looked over the audience and saw her father smiling proudly in the front row. Taking a deep breath, she began. "When I was sitting in that seat on Flight 309, I thought silence meant weakness. But I've learned that silence can also hold strength. It's not the silence of fear, it's the silence of patience, of knowing your worth even when someone else doesn't." The crowd stilled, listening as she continued. "I forgave Mrs. Hale not because she asked, but because I didn't want her mistake to own me. Forgiveness doesn't erase what happened, it just stops it from defining who you are. I hope this fellowship helps others remember that we can all sit in the same sky and still have room to breathe." Her voice trembled slightly on the last sentence. The applause that followed was soft at first, then grew like a rising wave. Nathaniel closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sound wash over him. After the ceremony, people surrounded them, officials, reporters, students. But in the crowd, one face caught Amara's eye. Victoria Hale. She was standing quietly near the exit, dressed simply, her expression humble. Their eyes met across the room. Amara hesitated, then walked toward her. The noise around them faded until it felt like the world had given them a private space. "Mrs. Hale?" she said softly. Victoria smiled faintly. "Amara, you spoke beautifully." "Thank you," the girl replied, her tone kind but steady. "You came all the way here?" Victoria nodded. "I wanted to see what hope looks like in person." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small box. "This belonged to my mother. She used to say you don't keep forgiveness in your heart. You give it away. I'd like you to have it." Inside was a small silver pin shaped like a feather, engraved with the words, "Still I rise." Amara's eyes softened. "It's beautiful." "So are you," Victoria said quietly. "You saved me without even meaning to." Amara didn't know what to say. She simply hugged her. For a moment, the noise, the flash of cameras, the weight of everything that had happened, none of it mattered. Two people once divided by prejudice stood in the same light, bound now by understanding. Later that evening, Nathaniel and Amara sat by the reflecting pool outside the Capitol. The water shimmered like melted glass, catching the lights of the city. "She's changed," Amara said quietly. Nathaniel nodded. "So have you." She smiled. "I didn't mean to become anyone's lesson." He looked at her, proud. "You didn't. You became a mirror. Sometimes that's harder." They sat in silence for a while, watching ripples spread across the water. A group of children ran past, laughing, somewhere far above. A plane crossed the sky, its sound faint and distant. "Dad," she whispered, "when you were my age, did you ever feel like the world was too big to change?" He smiled. "Every day." But that's the thing about big worlds. They only change when someone small dares to move first. Amara thought about that long after they returned home. Over the next few weeks, she and her father began visiting schools, meeting students who wanted to join the 2A fellowship. Each visit brought new faces, new stories of courage and kindness. Some had never flown on a plane before, but they understood what it meant to be unseen, unheard. One afternoon, during a visit to a public school in Detroit, a shy boy named Malik raised his hand. "Miss Amara," he said, "how do you stay kind when the world isn't?" She paused before answering. "Kindness isn't weakness," she said softly. "It's what keeps you human when everything else tries to turn you hard." The boy smiled, and she saw herself in his eyes, small, uncertain, but willing to believe. Back in Chicago, Nathaniel's office had turned into the headquarters for the Open Sky Project. Calls came in daily from universities, corporations, even international agencies wanting to replicate their model. Yet for Nathaniel, success wasn't measured in headlines. It was in letters. Handwritten, heartfelt notes from strangers who said that because of his daughter, they spoke up when someone else was being dismissed or ignored. One night, after another long day, he found Amara asleep on the couch, her notebook resting open beside her. On the page, she had written, "Maybe justice isn't loud. Maybe it's the quiet that stays after the noise fades." He smiled, brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, and whispered, "You're right, my little light." Outside, a soft rain began to fall, tapping against the windows like a steady heartbeat. The city breathed, alive, and still learning. Somewhere across the night sky, a Pacific Sky flight soared eastward. Inside, passengers of every color, every story, sat side by side, strangers bound by shared air, by shared hope, and perhaps high above the clouds, the sky itself had learned to listen. Autumn arrived early that year. brushing Chicago's skyline in gold and rust. The winds off Lake Michigan carried the scent of rain and change. From her bedroom window, Amara watched leaves fall in lazy spirals, the city beneath them moving with the rhythm of a place learning to be softer. She'd grown taller that summer, not just in height, but in how she carried herself. The world had called her brave, but what she felt most days was simply human. The Blakes' apartment was quiet, except for the soft hum of the news on TV. Reporters were still talking about the Open Sky Project, which had now expanded internationally. Nathaniel was on the board of global advisors, balancing late-night calls with morning breakfasts with his daughter. The world wanted his expertise, but at home, he was still the man who made her pancakes shaped like stars. That morning, as she poured syrup over her breakfast, Amara said suddenly, "Dad, can I ask you something real?" Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. Amused. "You only ever ask real questions." She hesitated. "Do you ever worry that people only see us because of what happened, not for who we are?" He set his coffee down and studied her. "You mean, do I worry they see you as a symbol, not as Amara?" She nodded. He smiled gently. "Symbols fade. Amara, but truth lasts. You didn't ask for the spotlight, but what you did with it, that's yours to keep." She took a bite, thoughtful. Maybe the world needs both. A story to follow, and someone to remind them the story's real. Later that day, they were invited to a conference in New York City, the Global Summit on Equity and Leadership. It was the biggest event Nathaniel had ever spoken at, and this time he insisted Amara come with him. The venue was breathtaking, a glass hall overlooking the Hudson River, filled with delegates from 50 nations. Cameras lined the back walls. The theme banner read, "Beyond Power, Leading with Empathy," as the keynote speaker. Nathaniel was escorted to the main stage. Before stepping up, he looked down at his daughter seated in the front row. She gave him a small thumbs up. He smiled and began his speech. "Power without compassion is noise," he said, his deep voice resonating across the hall. "It's only when power listens that change becomes possible." My daughter taught me that. Not through speeches or headlines, but through silence. Silence that demanded to be understood. The crowd leaned in. Some took notes. Others simply watched, moved by the weight of calm authority in his words. He continued, "The lesson of Seat 2A isn't just about prejudice. It's about humanity, about remembering that the smallest act of dignity, standing firm, staying kind, can echo louder than anger." When he finished, the room erupted into applause. Cameras flashed. Journalists scribbled. But Amara didn't clap right away. She just sat there, watching her father glow with quiet pride. She saw not the CEO everyone admired, but the man who once stayed up all night teaching her multiplication, the man who reminded her that forgiveness wasn't weakness, but wisdom. Afterward, as the hall emptied, a woman approached them, tall, elegant, maybe in her 30s. She introduced herself as Dr. Selena Vaughn, a sociologist who had been studying how single acts of public courage ripple into social reform. "Mr. Blake," she said warmly, "your daughter's story has become part of university curricula worldwide. We're calling it the 2A principle, how small acts of grace create large-scale accountability." Nathaniel nodded humbly, but Selena turned to Amara with genuine admiration. "You've done what many adults can't. You've shown that strength can whisper." Amara blushed. "I just wanted to sit in my seat." Selena smiled. "Exactly. And sometimes, sitting is a revolution." That night, back at the hotel, Amara couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, the city lights flickering like restless stars. Nathaniel was asleep in the next room, but she could hear his steady breathing. She opened her notebook and began writing again. Sometimes I think the world only changes when someone refuses to move, not out of defiance, but out of faith that they belong right where they are. She paused, tapping the pen against her chin. Then she wrote another line. And maybe the hardest part of being heard is staying quiet long enough to let others listen. The next morning, an unexpected visitor knocked on their suite door. It was Victoria Hale. She looked different, hair shorter, expression softer. She'd come not as the woman from the past, but as a new one shaped by accountability. "Nathaniel," she greeted when he opened the door. "I'm sorry to come unannounced, but I wanted to give you both something." From her bag, she pulled out a document folder. "I've been working with Ava Sinclair and Richard Calder. We've finalized a foundation, the Blake Hale Initiative. It will provide grants to young leaders who face discrimination, helping them turn their pain into purpose." Nathaniel's brows lifted. "You didn't have to. I did," she interrupted gently. "You both gave me a chance to rebuild myself. This is how I return it." Amara looked at her, speechless for a moment. "You named it after both of us." Victoria smiled faintly. "Because forgiveness belongs to both sides of a story." They talked for hours about change, about responsibility, about how life could twist pain into progress. By the time Victoria left, the morning sun had climbed high, scattering light through the glass like a quiet benediction. Weeks later, at the launch of the foundation, the event drew global attention. Cameras flashed as Amara and Victoria stood side by side. But this time, the cameras didn't feel invasive. They felt like witnesses to something bigger than either of them. When it was Amara's turn to speak, she looked at the crowd and began softly, her voice steady and sure. "When I was younger, I thought stories ended when justice was served. But now I know they begin when compassion starts. I don't want to live in a world that waits for tragedy to learn empathy. I want to live in a world that practices it every day." The crowd rose to its feet, clapping, cheering, somewhere among them. Nathaniel wiped a quiet tear. He wasn't crying out of sadness or pride, but out of recognition that this, all of it, was the reason he'd built his empire not for wealth, but for worth. That night, after the ceremony, Amara found herself standing outside again, looking up at a sky streaked with jet trails. The air was cool, fragrant with the promise of rain. She whispered, half to herself, half to the stars, "Seat 2A was just a chair, but what we built from it, that's the real journey." Behind her, Nathaniel joined her quietly. He rested a hand on her shoulder. "You've given the sky a new meaning, Amara." She smiled, leaning against him. "No, Dad, we did." The city lights shimmered around them, and above the clouds, unseen but certain, another plane soared forward. Inside it, strangers of every kind shared the same small space, breathing the same air, moving towards somewhere new. And in that shared sky, dignity wasn't an exception anymore. It was the rule. Winter returned to Chicago in whispers, soft flakes falling over the river, city lights glowing behind a curtain of snow. The year had changed, but the story of Seat 2A had not faded. If anything, it had deepened, like a melody that people kept replaying, not because it was loud, but because it felt true. For Amara, the months since the Foundation's launch had been full of travel. She had spoken in schools, at youth summits, in churches and libraries. Her face had appeared on magazine covers, though she never cared for fame. Each place she visited, she carried the same notebook, its pages thick with new names, People she met, stories they shared, lessons they left behind. But on one gray December morning, she woke to find her father's usual place at the breakfast table empty. His coffee cup sat untouched, a single newspaper folded beside it. A note lay on top, written in his familiar hand. Flight delayed to Puck for the policy review. Don't wait up, my light. Dad. She smiled, tracing his handwriting, unaware that this note would stay with her far longer than any speech or applause. That night, heavy snow swept across the Midwest. News channels warned of cancellations and grounded flights. Amara kept glancing at her phone, checking for updates, counting hours. The apartment felt larger without his voice. When the call finally came, it wasn't from him, it was from Ava Sinclair. Her tone was calm, but too careful. Amara, your father's plane had to make an emergency landing in Ohio. Everyone's safe, but communications are down because of the storm. The Open Sky team is coordinating a response. Amara's breath caught. Is he hurt? No reports of injuries? We're still waiting for confirmation. The minutes stretched into hours. The wind howled against the glass like an anxious heartbeat. Amara sat on the couch, hugging his coat, the scent of cedar and coffee still clinging to it. Every sound felt amplified, the ticking clock, the faint hum of the refrigerator, her own uneven breathing. When her phone finally rang again, it was him. Dad, she gasped. I'm fine, sweetheart, Nathaniel said, his voice faint through static. A rough landing. That's all. We're safe in a hangar until they clear the runway. Tears welled in her eyes. You scared me. I know. I'm sorry. A pause, then a chuckle. Guess the sky just wanted to remind me who's really in charge. Promise me you'll come home tomorrow. I promise, he said softly. There's too much left to do for both of us. When the line cut out, she sat in silence, watching the snowfall blur the city lights. Somewhere far away, in a hangar full of stranded passengers, her father was probably doing what he always did, comforting strangers, organizing order out of chaos. And he did. Nathaniel spent the night helping a frightened mother calm her child, guiding an elderly man to a chair, calling for blankets when the temperature dropped. People recognized him, whispered his name, but he brushed it off. Titles don't matter tonight, he said. We're all just passengers waiting for clearer skies. By morning, news outlets had already turned the incident into a headline. Aerolink CEO aids passengers during emergency landing. But when Amara saw the photo of him distributing water bottles in a snow-covered hangar, she didn't see a headline, she saw home. 3 days later, he returned to Chicago. The reunion at the airport was quiet and fierce. She ran into his arms before he'd even cleared the terminal, tears and laughter colliding all at once. I told you, he said, smiling. Storms don't last forever. Yeah. She sniffed. But they can scare you half to death first. He laughed softly, ruffling her hair. That's how you know they're real. In the weeks that followed, something shifted between them. Nathaniel seemed more reflective, slower in his movements, as if he'd begun measuring time differently. He spent more evenings cooking, fewer on conference calls. One night, as they watched the news together, he said quietly, I've been thinking, Amara, maybe it's time for you to take more of the stage. She blinked. Me? He nodded. The world listens to your voice differently. They see themselves in you. I can guide from behind, but you, my light, you carry the next flight plan. Her chest tightened. You're not retiring, are you? He smiled. Redefining, let's call it that. The following month, at a packed auditorium in Atlanta. Amara stood alone under the lights for the first time without her father beside her. The crowd was larger than anything she'd faced. 5,000 people, cameras streaming live across the world. She began softly. A year ago, I was just a girl sitting in seat 2A. I didn't know my silence would echo so far. But it did, because silence only travels when the truth behind it is heavy enough to move hearts. Her voice grew steadier. We can't undo what divides us overnight, but we can choose to stop pretending we don't see it. We can choose to sit next to someone different and ask their name instead of judging their face. The applause rose, but she didn't pause for it. My dad once said the sky is the biggest classroom we'll ever share. Up there, no one's above anyone else. We're all just learning how to stay in flight. When she finished, she glanced at the front row where Nathaniel sat, clapping, eyes glistening. He mouthed 2 words, proud always. That night, during the reception, he was quieter than usual. A few close friends noticed. You all right? Nate Richard Calder asked, clapping a hand on his shoulder. Nathaniel smiled. Just a little tired. Watching your child outgrow your shadow, it's the best kind of ache. But later, as they drove home, Amara noticed his hand tremble slightly on the steering wheel. You sure you're okay? I'm fine, he said gently, though his voice was thinner than usual. Just need rest. The next morning, he didn't wake up. It was peaceful. The doctor said, no pain. A heart simply too full for too long. The world mourned. News anchors called him a visionary, a reformer, a father of modern equity. But to Amara, he was the man who made pancakes shaped like stars, who whispered prayers over her nightmares, who taught her that forgiveness is stronger than fury. The funeral was held at St. Augustine's Cathedral, sunlight streaming through colored glass. Thousands attended, politicians, students, strangers who'd once written to say his daughter had changed their lives. But the moment that stayed with everyone came when Amara stepped up to the pulpit. She looked out at the sea of faces, then up at the stained glass above her. Her voice was soft, unbroken. My father taught me that leadership isn't about being the loudest in the room. It's about being the calm when the room shakes. A pause. Then he used to call me his light. But really, he was mine. Silence filled the hall, thick, sacred, and then, as if on cue, the organ began to play, and hundreds of people rose to their feet. The applause that followed wasn't loud. It was reverent. It sounded like gratitude. That night, alone in her room, Amara opened her notebook one last time. On the first page, beneath her father's earliest note, teach hearts before policies, she wrote. Even the sky needs rest, but its lessons never stop reaching us. Outside, snow drifted past her window, somewhere above the clouds. She liked to imagine her father's favorite line echoing back to her. Power means nothing if it doesn't protect someone smaller than you. She smiled through tears, whispering to the quiet night, I'll keep flying. Dad, I promise. And the sky, as if listening, stayed still, silent, vast, and full of light. Spring came quietly to Chicago that year. The snow melted slower than usual, like it didn't want to leave the city that had held so much grief. In the Blake apartment, the air still carried her father's presence, his cologne faint on his favorite jacket, his laughter lingering in the walls, his framed quote above the desk that read, laid gently, but never look away. Amara spent the first few weeks in silence. The foundation ran smoothly under Ava Sinclair's guidance, but she rarely attended meetings. She wandered through the apartment, touching small things that once seemed ordinary, his coffee spoon, the worn corner of his Bible, a paperclip bent into the shape of a heart. Grief had its own gravity, and she was learning how to breathe inside it. One morning, she sat by the window, watching a plane cross the sky. For a moment, she imagined her father sitting in the cockpit, smiling, saying, "See, my light." The world keeps moving. The thought made her both ache and smile. Then her phone buzzed. It was an email from Ava. Subject opportunity you should see. The Department of Transportation and the Civil Rights Council are launching a national summit on equity in travel. They've invited us, but they specifically requested you, Amara. Not as a representative of your father, but as yourself. Amara stared at the screen, heart pounding. She wasn't sure she was ready, but something in her father's voice seemed to echo through memory. When the world calls, answer softly, but answer. 3 weeks later, she stood backstage at the Washington Convention Center. The hall was massive, filled with leaders from airlines, schools, and civil rights organizations. The banner read, "The Open Skies Summit, Reimagining Dignity in Travel." Her palms were sweating. She whispered a small prayer before stepping onto the stage. The room hushed. Cameras clicked, and then, in a voice steadier than she felt, Amara began, "My name is Amara Blake. I'm not here because of a headline or because I sat in seat 2A. I'm here because of what happened after. Because my father believed that dignity shouldn't depend on status or color or fear. He believed it should be as basic as breathing." The crowd leaned forward. She continued, her tone rising and falling with quiet conviction. "We talk a lot about systems training, policies, audits, but we forget something simpler. Humanity doesn't need a manual. It needs memory. We must remember how we made people feel. That's where the change begins." A murmur spread through the hall. Agreement, reflection, a few teary eyes. Then she did something no one expected. She invited Victoria Hale, the former passenger who had once stood silent as discrimination unfolded, onto the stage. The audience gasped. Victoria walked slowly, visibly trembling. When she reached the podium, she turned toward Amara. "I was there that day," she said quietly. "I saw wrong and did nothing, and that silence haunted me more than any headline. But Amara, she forgave me before I ever asked. She told me that silence can become strength if we use it differently next time. So, this summit exists because she gave me a second chance." The applause began as a ripple, then grew until the room was on its feet. Amara smiled faintly, eyes shining. "Forgiveness doesn't erase pain," she said. "It transforms it. It makes space for what comes next." After the summit, news outlets flooded her inbox requests for interviews, collaborations, speaking tours, but she turned most of them down. Instead, she spent the next few months working with Ava and Malik Vaughn to expand the Open Sky Foundation into schools across America. They built empathy simulations for airline staff, funded bias research, and launched mentorships for youth from underrepresented backgrounds to enter aviation careers. One afternoon, as they reviewed progress reports, Ava looked up from her laptop. "You know," she said, "your father would be proud, but I think he'd also tell you to take a break." Amara laughed. "He would. Probably with that look that means, 'You're working harder than sleeping.'" "Exactly." Ava grinned. "So what do you say to a trip somewhere with no Wi-Fi?" Amara hesitated. "A trip. Yes. For once. Let the sky take care of you." A month later, Amara boarded a small regional flight to Maine, a quiet getaway near Bar Harbor. As she found her seat, 2A again, she smiled at the irony. The same number, the same view, but everything felt different now. Midway through the flight, the seat beside her was taken by a little girl, maybe 9 years old, clutching a stuffed rabbit. Her mother sat across the aisle, nervous about turbulence. The girl glanced up shyly. "Hi," she whispered. "I like your necklace." Amara touched the pendant, a silver compass her father had given her. "Thank you. It reminds me to always find my way back." The girl grinned. "Are you scared of flying?" "Not anymore," Amara said softly. "I used to be, but someone I love taught me that the sky isn't scary. It's just big enough to hold all our stories." The girl nodded, as if that made perfect sense. Then she looked out the window. "It's really pretty up here. Like the world forgot to be mean for a while." Amara felt her throat tighten. That's a beautiful way to say it. When the plane landed, the little girl handed her a picture of two people in an airplane, holding hands, clouds shaped like hearts above them. "For you," she said. "So you remember today." Amara smiled through tears. "I won't forget." As she stepped off the plane, sunlight spilled across the tarmac, warm and forgiving. She lifted her face to it, feeling the soft wind carry the scent of salt from the sea. And for the first time since her father's passing, she didn't feel the ache of loss as a wound. She felt it as an anchor, a reminder that love doesn't vanish. It just changes form. That evening, she walked along the cliffs, waves crashing below. She took out her notebook and wrote a single sentence. "The sky has no favorites. It remembers only how we treat each other beneath it." Then she closed it, smiling at the horizon. Somewhere, she imagined her father watching, nodding in quiet approval. When she returned to Chicago weeks later, the world had moved forward, but her work had only just begun. Her foundation's programs were adopted by 2 major airlines, and several universities added her story to their ethics curriculum. Reporters began calling her the voice of the new skies, but she never let the titles define her. One late night, she found herself alone in her father's old office, now her own. The desk lamp glowed softly, illuminating a photo of the 2 of them laughing. She reached for it, whispering, "We made it? Dad." A small knock sounded at the door. It was Malik, holding a file. "You're still working." She chuckled. "Old habits." He placed the file down. "Before you call it a night, you should see this." Inside were letters, hundreds of them, from passengers, students, and crew members. Each told a story of change. A pilot wrote, "I used to think bias training was just PR. Now I understand it's about decency." A teacher said, "My students watched your speech. They're starting a project called Skykind." Amara's hands trembled as she read. Tears welled up, soft and unstoppable. "He'd be so happy," she murmured. Malik smiled gently. He'd say, "You didn't just change the sky, you made people look up again." She laughed quietly, wiping her eyes. "Yeah, maybe we all did." As he left, she turned off the lamp, leaving the window open. The city lights flickered below, like distant constellations, and in that quiet, she whispered one last promise. "The sky remembers, Dad, and so will I." Outside, a plane crossed the night, its lights blinking steady and sure, like a heartbeat against the dark. The story of Amara Blake isn't just about racism, it's about how dignity can rise quietly in the face of injustice. In a world where anger often meets anger, her calm strength showed something deeper, that self-respect doesn't need to shout to be heard. True power lies not in how loud we fight, but in how steady we stand. Her father, Nathaniel Blake, taught us that forgiveness is not surrender, it's wisdom. By turning pain into purpose, they transformed humiliation into reform and silence into movement. Their journey reminds us that change doesn't always come from leaders or laws. It begins in small, human moments when someone refuses to give in to hate. For those who've ever felt invisible or disrespected, this story is a mirror, a reminder that worth isn't granted by others. It's something no one can take away. And for those watching from the outside, it's a gentle call to listen more deeply, to act more kindly, and to remember that equality isn't an ideal, it's a daily practice. Thank you for watching and sharing this journey with us. Stories like Amara's remind us that kindness, courage, and justice still matter in today's world. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories that celebrate dignity and humanity. Your support helps us bring more voices to light and together. We can keep the message alive that respect is not a privilege, it's a right. See you in the next story.